Good. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the CLF Toronto webinar. Today, we're talking about leading the shift, how Canada's top contractors are reducing job site emissions. My name is Anya Barkin, and I am the programming co-lead for CLF Toronto. And I'm happy to host and moderate this event. And I'll do a little introduction for CLF, and then we'll kick off with the webinar. So if you haven't attended CLF Toronto events before, really this is an opportunity for us to bring more awareness to embodied carbon talk and have discussions about different embodied carbon topics. And really spurring collective action to solve the embodied carbon challenge. If you are interested in getting involved with CLF Toronto, whether it is with you have any suggestions for future events, whether it's a webinar or in-person event, or you would like to volunteer or get behind the scenes and learn about how we put all these events together, please do get in touch with us. As a Toronto-based group, we acknowledge the land that we're meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishwaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And also want to acknowledge that we have speakers and potentially audience members that are coming from other parts of the country. And I want to acknowledge the traditional territory that they're on as well. Just a bit of housekeeping. We will have a Q&A session at the end. So if you do have questions, and I'm sure you will, please put them in the chat and we'll get to hopefully all of them at the end. Or maybe there's going to be more that we can cover and we'll answer them later. Recommended using the speaker view for your viewing pleasure. Please keep audio and video off. And the session will be recorded, so you will have an opportunity to share this session with anybody who might have not been able to attend today, or maybe rewatch it. And you'll see that there is a survey that just popped up. We just want to see kind of the demographics of who you represent in the industry. So please just put in your selection, and that helps us in terms of engaging the audience for our future events. Okay, and then, so let's get into the webinar. So again, the webinar today is all about job site emissions and reducing job site emissions. And we'll talk about how we are, as general contractors, have an alliance and working together towards it. I'm going to introduce the speakers. We have Prab Benga, Vice President of Sustainability with Aecon. We have Denise Van Opperbegen, Director of Climate and Sustainability with EllisDon. And then we have Audrina Lim, Director of Sustainable Construction with Chandos. Thank you for joining us. So I will provide a little bit of context about our alliance with general contractors and the report that we have released at the end of last year, and then I'll let our speakers speak more specifically about initiatives in their companies and the collaboration as part of the alliance. So we, as general contractors, have formed an alliance called the Canadian Construction Sustainability Alliance. We started meeting back in 2024, and we represent 9 of Canada's largest general contractors. So the 9 are Aecon, Bird, Chandos, EllisDon, Graham, Ledcor, Multiplex, PCL, and Pomerleau. So we represent a significant chunk of the construction industry in Canada. And what we wanted to do is come together. This is a voluntary alliance. This is also self-organized, which is quite rare. But the opportunity is to collaborate, share information, and really have a collective voice as general contractors to lead the industry towards low carbon construction. So as our first initiative, our focus is site emissions, and we have partnered with the Transition Accelerator to put together the most comprehensive analysis of Canadian job site emissions to date. I'll give you a little bit more details about that in a slide. But what we have achieved with that, we have identified 5 high impact actions to reduce emissions in the construction industry in Canada. And a lot of the focus will be for this webinar will be those 5 high impact actions. And again, so the purpose is to act as a collective voice for general contractors and signaling to the industry that we are ready to lead Canada's shift towards low carbon construction. So through this analysis, it was a very comprehensive analysis that was done on job site emissions. And why is it so important is if you are familiar with the life cycle stages of a building, the focus here is the A5 stage, which is the construction stage emissions. And they're very often underestimated. If you look at different LCA tools, they might say 3, 4, maybe 5% of life cycle emissions are for the construction stage. And we wanted to provide the data, whether to support it or to say that actually it's a much more significant, the job site emissions represent a much more significant portion of life cycle emissions. So as part of the alliance, the 9 companies, we shared data across many of our projects. More than 600 projects were identified and data was shared from them. Transition Accelerator did a lot of the heavy lifting in the analysis of all this data, and we're very thankful for all these efforts because it was definitely a lot of data that they have to sift through and try to see the patterns in. And the analysis was broken down to projects by type, activity, fuel use, and location. And of course, the focus is specifically the job site emissions, so everything that happens on the site. As you can see on the kind of the pie chart to the right, you see the portions of the different fuels that are being used on construction sites. So really a big focus on diesel. Diesel represents a very big portion of the emissions on the construction site. So a lot of the focus is there as well. So how the data was analyzed, we used these 4 key dimensions to analyze the data. So technical readiness, so is the technology mature and available, specific in the Canadian market? Economic viability, opportunity, how much does it cost? What's the payback? What are the potential savings that are involved as well? Operational feasibility, what does it take to integrate this new technology on the construction site, and what are the training needs? And then finally, and maybe the most challenging one, is the behavior acceptance and the behavior change that is required for the people that are implementing those technologies on our sites. So let's get to the meat of it. So the 5 high impact actions that were identified through this analysis. Number 1 is light duty vehicles and equipment electrification. So really looking at the smaller equipment, the ones where the solutions much of them are already available in the market. There's a significant potential reduction of emissions, but also the increase of efficiency that is available there. heating represents a very significant source of emissions on construction sites. And the focus here is, first of all, optimization. There's a lot of efficiency opportunities to reduce the amount of fuel that we use for heating and do it in a much smarter way. And then also electrification of heating as well. Number three, as I mentioned before, diesel plays such a big role in the emissions on construction sites. Using renewable diesel as a bridge fuel has a very significant opportunity in reducing emissions. Four is another source of emissions are generators. So opportunity to for early grid connection when it's available, or hybrid power solutions is another significant one. And the final one is all about excavation, the early works of projects, particularly the civil works and the excavation, that has a very significant impact on emissions. And looking at other options, whether hybrid or electric, for those heavy equipment types, that's another opportunity for reducing emissions. So from a timeline perspective, where do we see that we can reach a significant reduction in emissions? Through this analysis based on the maturity, the readiness, that integration, all those elements that we looked at, we see an opportunity to reduce emissions by 75% by 2040. So very significant reduction in emissions, and that takes into account action on all those 5 high impact actions that I just described. And now that we've released the report at the end of last year, and I will share a link to the report in the chat. But we are engaging with all our stakeholders because the stakeholders play such a critical role in scaling decarbonization technologies, from pilot projects to industry-wide adoptions. So we are engaging with construction companies beyond the 9 that are part of the alliance, equipment manufacturers, utility and energy providers for those grid connections and streamlining that process, fuel distributions, as well as governments. So I feel like you should have good context now. Again, I'll share the link to the report in the chat, and I'll give the floor to Prab to provide the Aecon perspective.
Thank you so much, Anya. So as Anya mentioned, I am Prab Banga, Vice President of Sustainability with Aecon. So taking what Anya sort of talked about in terms of those key actions that came out of this report, I'll give you some examples of each of those actions and how they are being implemented across our operations at Aecon. So next slide, if the first example is around accelerating electrification of light duty vehicles. So what we've been doing at Aecon is using case analysis for fleet decarbonization. So looking at, we've done an examination of our current fleet, and we're focused on first right sizing, so ensuring that individuals who need a certain size of vehicle aren't getting a larger vehicle. So just kind of right sizing the strategy, and then looking at hybrid options as well as electrification. And all this is being determined based on business cases and what's available in terms of fleet in the market. Installation of EV charging stations. So Aecon did receive funding through the ZVIP program, which is a zero emissions vehicle program through the federal government. And through that funding, we received funding to install EV charging stations. So we've been slowly installing them across our operations to really prepare for the introduction of electric fleet, as well as potentially electric construction equipment in the future as well. We continue to test out low carbon equipment, specifically the areas that we're seeing the most options for are around solar light towers, LED lighting, as well as some of those smaller hand tools, and just looking at converting smaller hand tools to battery and electric options because there's many of those available on the market. There you'll see a picture of a trial that we did on our Kicking Horse Highway project in British Columbia, where we were testing out solar light towers. Received really good feedback from the team on those, and we're starting to deploy those across our operations where it makes sense. Next slide, which is action number 2. So I think I missed one. If you go back one, Anya. Okay, weird. Maybe they're in the wrong order. That's okay. So action number 3, transition to renewable diesel as a bridge fuel. So as a group, when we were looking at emissions on job sites, we realized that there is still some time for technology to catch up when it comes to electrification of construction equipment. So as a bridge solution, we are focused on transitioning to renewable diesel. Renewable diesel has the potential to decrease your emissions from anywhere from 20% to about 80% on site, depending on the blend. So what we're focused on is attempting to get cost parity on renewable diesel by really aggregating the demand across the general contractors, the nine general contractors in this group, and really being able to justify the business case of bringing renewable diesel to different geographical locations across Canada. Educating our teams is a key one. There's a behavior change element to this. Even though renewable diesel does not have any operational impacts, there is still a learning curve about educating our internal employees about what renewable diesel is. And then on the last part of it is communicating with our OEMs. So our equipment manufacturers on the use of renewable diesel and making sure that our equipment is compatible, which in most cases it definitely is. Next slide. So action number 5, incorporating hybrid and electric solutions for excavation and earthworks. So here I would say that this is very much in a pilot phase. We're working with our suppliers on looking at solutions that are new to market and really starting to pilot them on site. So this past summer, we piloted the electric wheel loader in Alberta just to test it out and see how electric equipment can be integrated into our operations. There are very specific applications such as for tunneling where there's a requirement for electric equipment, and then also if we have projects with grid connection, those are the ones that work the best when it comes to the use of electric construction equipment, obviously because of that grid connection aspect. We're seeing a lot more options for the mini series of equipment, so mini excavator, mini wheel loader. So there we have a photo of a mini electric excavator that's manufactured by Volvo that we were able to test out on one of our utilities projects. And then hybrid equipment. So we're hearing from companies like large manufacturers like Caterpillar on that more and more availability of hybrid options for larger construction equipment. I'll pass it on to Audrina. Thank you.
Nice job, Rob. That's awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just wanted to go through what we're learning at Chandos. So we're in an earlier phase, I guess, of our analysis and looking at how we can adopt some of these recommendations. Next slide, please, Anya. So I guess from a technical readiness, we started with a lot of analytics. We wanted to make sure that our information that was driving our decisions focused on the work mix that we have, the region, because we are predominantly, like 50% of our work is in Alberta, if not more. And so we started looking at like, what are the things that we can use to leverage the steps, but also make sure that we have interim goals that we can meet. So some of the things we looked at was by each district, what was the consumption level of what type of fuels? And that helps us ascertain what our current strategy looks like and where we need to evolve to. So you can see we did a little bit of a deep dive, and another exercise we did was about fuel density and making sure that the emissions that we were generating were the best use of output. So we started looking at what the anomalies were, studying the good examples and the bad examples, and how we can then strategize a next step for our team. We also are a bit unique. We do have a lot of our own equipment. So it is looking at like, what is that huge capital cost for us to decarbonize, and looking at what optimization and interim steps can be taken. So we're looking at retrofitting our existing equipment, servicing life, making sure that we understand what's coming. Evolution of our inventory as we replace and purchase new or repair. What are the opportunities we can take? So we're starting to look at things like more efficient heating systems, like flameless heaters. Currently, we're running off of significant indirects. So this has not as high an efficiency. It's about a 60% efficiency. So I think we can do better, but we're just looking at the capital cost to go from one to the other and what that reduction looks like. And then we're moving towards more hybrid options within our own inventory as well, seeing if we can look at more solarized or electrified and with a backup diesel if required, because we do have crazy weather. For example, it's -30 today in Calgary and absolutely freezing. And it was like so warm the last couple of weeks. So we are trying to navigate what's coming. And so for us, we try and tackle that with technical readiness through these kind of focuses so far, and we're starting to make some gains. Next slide, please, Anya. So for economic viability, we're really studying the cost savings and paybacks, looking at like where we have co-benefits as well, so that we can make a solid business case for the switch. By tackling things like equipment electrification, heating optimization, and electrification of heating, and early grid connections, we've been studying a couple of key projects in our mix. Of course, with the electrification, we're focusing on Ontario and Alberta districts. So looking at how we can baseline assumptions. So we're running huge surveys across our entire operations to say, what did you quote for? What did you cost for? And how does that perform against what we imagined? And then looking at that from an emissions perspective, what were we anticipating for fuel use versus what we actually did, and what the strategies were to try and optimize. Now, our site supers are very competitive with each other, and so we created a challenge. And we're trying to get them to bring their best foot forward so that we can all share the knowledge across the board and learn from each other. So 2 of our sites I wanted to highlight. Our Mississippi Mills site, again, by focusing on schedule reductions and optimization, we were able to enclose prior to the deep winter condition season. So we were able to also fast track grid connection, and that enables us to go straight into electric heating, which allows us to heat where we're actually doing active work, and then tempering where we're not doing active work at a lower level. So we're really choosing where we put our energy, literally. And so we are going to be doing an awesome case study around that as soon as we get through our heating season. And then in Penticton, we're doing a really lovely BC housing build where our site super decided to opt for electrified heating system because they have a clean grid, and also because it was a lot more noise friendly, and also a lot more health and safety focused for emissions and breathing in, any kind of fumes. So for us, there's some co-benefits there that we're studying, and we're seeing lots of really great outcomes. And then for our remaining Chandos sites, we are looking at the inclusion of winter heating controls and looking at the cost savings versus the additional costs, if any, and what the optimization and co-benefits are, so that we can create viable business cases per typology of project and contract style. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one's a fun one. So we've looked at behavioral acceptance. This is where we're really focusing, is understanding where we can influence innovation and change. And that directly leads to then our operational feasibility. It can diagnose our gaps in how much more support we need to provide, what kind of education and training we need to provide as well. So we've launched our on-site emissions policy this year, and this is our first demonstration period that we're tracking. So I used our wonderful co-pilot to turn my emissions policy into a very easy to read graphic on the right side that kind of highlights all the targets. So in grid connections, we're prioritizing BC and Ontario. In Alberta, we're still looking at a gas connection because it's still a cleaner fuel for us for the benefit. In reducing our costs and emissions, we're looking for electric heating again and clean energy options. Like, are we able to use renewable fuels? how does that work with our existing equipment that we have to leverage from our yard? And other really easy to hit targets like no idling policy, opting for hybrid in our replacement on our light duty vehicles, incentivizing opportunities to, do better. Looking at fuel management, making sure spills are avoided. This is all part of health and safety as well. So it's actually quite intertwined. We don't want emissions through mishaps. IoT heating optimization. So using really awesome controls to optimize our winter heating, making sure that our heating and hoarding, the passive intervention, can actually be improved so that we don't have to use as much heating in the first instance. So using insulated blankets, double layering our entryways, all these sorts of little efficiency targets that we can do very simply. And then equipment, that's a bigger discussion that we're still working towards and studying. But what we have to do is look at all our surveyed financial data. We're trying to create those business cases and using the data to prove our case through behavioral outcomes. So if we can say, hey, this team's doing something amazing, all the other teams are going to want to come to that, and they're going to want to show that level of performance. So for us, all of these things we're going to educate our team on, showcasing what we're learning, focusing on peer-to-peer learning, because if I tell our team what to do, that's going to be a tough sell. But if they hear that their other teams are doing something awesome, they're going to want to jump into. And all in all, we are a employee-owned company, and we have very shared values. So our culture is building us towards a common goal of our net zero strategy. And for us, every contribution counts, and it helps towards our goals as an organization. So everybody's been chipping in, and they've been really, really awesome to bring forward their ideas. And that's where we're at so far. And we have a lot more planning to do. But yeah, we're just learning, and it's been awesome learning from our colleagues at the 9 partners, and looking forward to sharing more of what we learn. Thanks. Handing over to Denise.
Perfect. Thank you, Adrina. So yeah, I'm Denise Nobega, Director of Climate and Sustainability with EllisDon. I did want to give a really quick intro to those of you who may not be as familiar with EllisDon. We're a large construction company with operations in North America and the Middle East and North Africa. We do more than just construction. We do, as I like to describe it, almost everything in the construction and built environment. So from digitization to financing, designing, equipment, operations. And then we also have a dedicated climate and sustainability team. So we're really focused on how do we best support our clients to make their projects as sustainable as possible, as well as how do we make our own operations as sustainable as possible. So with that, I'll highlight some of the areas we've been looking into in terms of decarbonizing our job sites. So the first element would be heating. You've kind of heard that throughout. We've really identified heating as one of our primary sources of emissions on our job sites. And we're looking to tackle that in 3 main ways. So the first being really effective enclosures, and that's looking at both improve methods and materials, as well as best practices to kind of contain that heat that we use during the construction of our project. So it's really looking at how do we stop air leakage there. We're both looking at that in terms of having our projects look at their winter heat planning earlier. This is in collaboration with our quality team because there's obviously co-benefits there, as well as looking into some research in terms of okay, what materials or other best practices are there, and what main opportunities do we have to improve there. So looking to set that up and kind of help educate our project teams and help kind of engage there as well in terms of what we can move. The second element is really looking at smart controls to manage our heaters. So these smart controls really look at, they will shut down equipment when the ideal temperature is met, rather than that it needs to be done manually. It's basically like your Google Nest or any kind of smart control you might have at home, but using it for a job site. We're hearing some good feedback on that as well, besides the obviously managing of our fuel usage there and the emissions associated with that. There's cost savings there. There's labor savings there in terms of not having to manually inspect it and being able to do it from a smartphone. So that's something that we see as really promising, and I'll dive into that a little bit more after this. But then the third element that we're really looking at is understanding best practices in equipment selection and then sizing and placement as well as ultimately looking at like how can we decarbonize through electric and hybrid heating systems. We haven't really found, we've been exploring electric heating systems, but haven't found a project that fitted that well, specifically in terms of being able to get one where we had enough electric supply and also where it made economic sense to move that way. But we continue to explore different projects and seeing where it makes sense because it's something that we would like to explore further. So I'd like to dive into the smart heating controls a little bit more. So this is an overview of 3 different civil sites where the smart heating system was used to control heaters, specifically for curing concrete pours. What you can see here is like that for 3 projects over the winter of 2025, there were big fuel savings that we found. Granted, I do want to put the note here that this is compared to a worst case scenario, which is where the heater would be running 24/7. But in some cases, that is in practice what would be happening. So we are quite lucky in terms of that with these smart controls, but it is comparing it to a worst case scenario. So I do want to caveat that with these numbers. But what we were seeing there is that we were seeing thousands, almost like hundreds of thousands of liters saved on a single project on one winter heating period, which came with significant cost savings and emission savings that are associated with that as well. So that's something that we're really focused on to bringing kind of across our project sites. These were 3 silver projects. We also really see there being kind of like an opportunity for this for obviously building projects when they're enclosed as well, smart control for finishes, or when we're in the finishing stage. So this is something that for us is a big focus area in terms of moving forward. Then the next area that I wanted to focus on would be renewable diesel. So this has really been kind of like a coordinated effort with our procurement and project teams to try and get this on different sites. Last year, we were piloting it specifically in the GTA and in BC, where we got renewable diesel on 9 project sites. And that was over kind of 130,000 liters, which saved or avoided about 250 tons of carbon dioxide. There are some limitations to renewable diesel. Currently, we're primarily limited to using it in the summer months, though it continues to kind of be extended in part through like using blends. So we can start using it in winter a little bit, depending on the area. And there was some change management required through educating our sites as well. We created an internal FAQ doc that was circulated. We're available for any kind of questions that sites had. And the main thing there had to do with the difference between biodiesel and renewable diesel. I think there was a level of education that needed to happen there because with renewable diesel, there is no concerns from equipment rental companies on using that. And it's basically a drop-in fuel. And any of our sites that have used renewable diesel haven't flagged any concerns to us, and we're quite happy with using it. So we're currently looking at our 2026 season and actively working towards kind of procuring more renewable diesel for that season. Our biggest barrier here is kind of challenges with supply and geographic availability, and tied to that as well, kind of like any kind of cost premiums that come with that. But we found at least that in BC or the Greater Vancouver area, as well as the Greater Toronto area, that we are able to get it and that we're trying to move it forward as much as we can. Then the third theme I wanted to touch on is electrification in general. So this covers a couple of the different action items that were mentioned in the report. And we're really looking at where can we explore or where can we electrify our processes where it's possible and where it makes sense. So as mentioned, like in the fleets, like there is a lot of electric alternatives already available. Um, but it does require some behavioral change management, and it doesn't make sense in all contexts. Like we have some remote locations with no grid connection. For those kind of projects, it doesn't make sense. So we're really looking at, first of all, optimizing our fleet and making sure that we have the right vehicles in the right places. And then from there, looking at like, okay, which of these projects or which of these use cases does it make sense to have an electric vehicle as well. Then the other element we're looking at is in terms of equipment. So for the smaller equipment, forklifts, mini X's, we're seeing a lot of electric opportunities available. We're starting to use, or we are using them already, so there's not as much of a challenge there. When it comes to the larger equipment, kind of to what Prab was saying as well, is that's a bit more of a long-term process. We are starting to explore because we do see that earthworks is like a big contributor to emissions as well. But there are some specifically technical challenges with kind of like having deployment ready equipment. As an example, we've been looking into the use of an electric excavators on one of our sites. So this is a larger electric excavator. But what we found when looking into that is that we also would need to rent and deploy a transformer as well, because there's some voltage differences between, I believe, like between the US and like what we need to use here. So that does make it a bit more challenging operational. It adds costs, it adds complexity. It's something that we're still actively looking into, but I do think that the electrification of the larger equipment is further out. And as perhaps said, it's like the hybrid side is more promising right now there. Another thing that we're looking at in terms of hybrids is the temporary power generation. So traditional generators are not usually as efficient, or they're sometimes oversized as well. And they tend to not be used at its full capacity. So this is really where a generator combined with a battery makes sense in terms of being able to store any of the energy when it's not being used at its full capacity, that can be used at times when the generator is switched off. So we've been piloting this on a couple of different sites, have been seeing some success with that as well. But again, it is going to be a case-by-case basis to see if it makes sense, because it does often come at a premium as well. So there needs to be a certain amount of either runtime or length of use of the generator for it to make economic sense on a project. And then ultimately what we're really focused on is getting a grid connection as soon as possible, because that really is what opens up options for us in order to minimize the temporary power generation to support any electric charging and heating that we might wish to do kind of either now or in the future. So that is one of the areas that we're kind of consistently focused on across the board. So kind of like with that, you've heard about the report, you've heard about how some of us are putting it into practice already. I think you've heard some of the same themes across the three of us. And that's really because we're running into the same challenges and we're seeing the same opportunities as well. So we're really looking into like, how can we use our collective voice to kind of create that momentum, address these barriers? And that's really where the Canadian Construction Sustainability Alliance comes into, and where this report was so useful. So with that, I'd love to open up the floor to any questions, unless Anya, Prab, or Audrina, you want to add something at this point as well?
No, I'm good. We can move to questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise, Prab, and Audrina. Yeah, I think we'll open the floor to questions. I saw there's a couple of questions in the chat already, and I welcome other audience members to please put in your questions into the chat. So we'll start with the first one from Zara. And this is also a nice continuation to the last slide that Denise had. How does the cost of electric equipment, and there's quite a range of different equipment, excavators, but also a lot of other type of equipment, compared to what's the cost of electrical equipment compared to typical alternatives?
I can take that, and then anyone can for sure add on to it. So generally, broad strokes, we're seeing that it's about electric construction equipment is about 2 to 3 times the cost of equivalent diesel models. What I have seen is a trend of that cost coming down slightly every year. When we compare hybrid, which is the more feasible option for the industry right now, hybrid, there is a business case to support hybrid construction equipment, mostly due to efficiency and reduction of fuel consumption. So we're getting that savings from the fuel consumption. So what we've heard from equipment manufacturers like Volvo and Caterpillar is that their trajectory is that hybrid is the focus area now, sort of to bridge that gap. And then eventually looking at electric construction equipment in the future as the costs come down. They're also exploring other areas like hydrogen and others, but still from a cost perspective, I would say that not there yet. When it comes to smaller sort of on-site accessories like battery powered generators, battery powered lights, like in that site accessory category, we are starting to see cost parity, or at least to be able to justify the use cases through savings in fuel.
And to add to that, I think it also highlights a little bit the kind of internal education or change management that comes with that, because I think what's interesting with this is for a lot of this hybrid equipment, as Pat mentioned, higher upfront costs, but then savings as part of the operating cost. We've had some internal feedback in terms of that regular or like standard practice procurement decisions. Oftentimes the efficiency is assumed to be the same between different equipment types. But this really requires a kind of a change in how different options are being evaluated, because it's looking at the upfront cost as well as the operating cost, rather than just what is the rental cost and assuming that the operating cost is going to be relatively similar between different equipment types. So that is something that we're really working on internally with our operations teams and procurement teams in terms of like getting that understanding out there and seeing how we can best adapt or leverage our processes to bring that some of the savings that you would see from the operations of hybrid generators hybrid equipment into the decision making there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for us, we're just looking at feasibility at the moment. Where we operate, it's not necessarily viable to go for a lot more electrified equipment just yet. And once we get more opportunities to decarbonize our grid around Alberta and in our Ontario and BC, we also have to look at things like availability of site laydown areas. So when you have to charge, I think those are the challenges we're still navigating for our own site logistics. But for us, as we get to push more forward with it, as we get more metrics around it and education around it and seeing it become a cost neutral outcome, that will be when we can push a little bit more forward on it. I think right now it's hard to compete when we have RFPs that don't stipulate electrified equipment. And if there are regulations or anyone in the regulation industry who want to incentivize that, I think that's an opportunity that I would put out there and to the industry and the crowd, to say, you know what, let's try and level up. Let's do one good thing, and maybe we can try and incentivize the use of electrified equipment. So it's all we take that sting out of that overhead cost.
Thank you. I think this is a great segue. I'm just going to jump one question and we'll get back to it. But I think this is a great segue to Jeremy's question. Does the report discuss recommended methods for owners to specify requirements for some degree of A5 emissions reduction? So kind of the RFP that you mentioned in Audrina.
Good timing. I feel like we're currently looking at where there's viability. And I think if the owners are interested to engage with us, we can absolutely talk about what creates a level playing field that we can do something better. And therefore, it becomes an interest area where we can say, hey, let's study this and let's study the benefits of financial outcomes. Would you guys agree?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would say it's not something that's directly addressed in the report, but it's definitely something that I think as a group we'd be interested in collaborating on.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, just if we see more uptake in the market to ask for this, I think the products are going to become much more competitive in the market, much more familiar, and there's less of that risk pricing or behavioral issues that we're identifying as like, okay, there's a gap, we need to close it. How do we do that? By stimulating the market to make it normalized. And I think that's why we've also come together, is because we want to signal like we need these to be viable for us to even meet some of these emission reduction targets that we're trying to do. And so collectively, if we can leverage all industry partners to push that forward, we can become absolutely a very clean industry as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we'll jump to another question from Rio. What are the challenges you face in gathering all this data and tackling these emissions? It's a big question.
Where do we start?
I think there's a big sign all over our sides.
I mean, I can take it off. So I think the issue with one of the biggest challenges is that so first one is availability of data across job sites, and then when it is available, it's inconsistent in terms of how, like, what the data looks like. And then I think there's a strong behavior element to this as well. It's basically us going to our job sites for another ask and saying, like, we need this data, and people at job sites not necessarily connecting it back to like why this data is relevant. So I think the construction industry overall, like we don't necessarily have objective like guidelines as to like what's in and out, and we're trying to follow like the greenhouse gas emissions protocol, but that's one thing that as a group we're looking at, is sort of having that consistency across metrics and data and definitions. So what's the definition of on-site emissions for a construction site, and what constitutes as a sustainable infrastructure project. So those are, I mean, that's like, one of the key goals of this group is that consistency across how we measure and how we collect data. A lot of us are on joint venture projects together, which definitely helps because we are looking at collecting that same data for emissions. And then the other aspect of it actually is suppliers as well. So engaging with our suppliers to be able to collect that data. So a lot of our suppliers have been providing us, are looking at and evaluating software solutions of their own, such as looking at the use of GeoTab and other solutions where we can get that real-time data, emissions data from our sites. So suppliers are a big aspect of that data collection component as well, and bringing them along the journey.
And I think adding to that, I mean, Prab covered like the biggest challenges there as well. But I think even looking at us, where I think there's a challenge as well with the granularity of data. I think in some cases, in terms of being able to track at a corporate level and understand what's happening at the project level. So we at EllisDon, we've developed kind of like a tool, so we're gathering all of the information from our invoices as they come in. That doesn't necessarily specify where that fuel is going to. Is that fuel going to a generator, or is that going to another piece of equipment? So that's really what we're doing then, pilot projects to kind of understand, okay, on these projects, where is this fuel or electricity going to, and like getting a better understanding of like the granularity of like, okay, what is using or what is emitting. So I think that's a bit of a challenge, especially if you're kind of spread across spread across the country, have lots of different types of projects as well. So I think it's a challenge of like gathering the data and then also making sure that it's interpreted in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree. I think we also, from our side, just with, I guess, the gathering of data and streamlining it, we have two options that we utilize to gather our data. It's through where dollars are spent, and we can deep dive all of the invoices, which is an onerous task. If you can imagine, we're much smaller than Aecon and EllisDon. We're 850 employees. However, it's still a challenge for us to build that infrastructure internally and gain that outcome. For us, we look at the invoices, so it allows us to validate, but we also look at like reports coming from vendors. And sometimes we have to try and help our vendors understand why we're tracking and what the ask is of them to be able to help streamline that process. And through that, if we can grow stronger as an industry where we can all have that same common framework on what we're reporting and why it's important, and we can automate it consistently across the board, I think we'd have bigger gains with the data. So currently, if we're not doing apples to apples data, it, like to Prab's earlier point, it almost doesn't quite get us there, and we have to choose what data we look at. And I think we could get lost in the weeds of how much data we want to dive into, but we need to also look at like what we're doing this for our productivity, for understanding where we can tackle. And I think this is where doing this collaboration with everybody and having focus points really enables us to tackle one task at a time rather than trying to solve all the world's problems. We can say, here are the big impact areas and focus on that. So some of the messaging from this is, hey, anyone supplying fuels, anyone supplying equipment, industry utility partners, we're going to be asking, and we're going to be really researching these focus points. And this is what, as consumers and also suppliers, we hope that you want to partner with us to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my dog's
Speaking of vendors or suppliers, a question more specific about smart temporary heating systems, asking for more details, and was there a specific vendor or equipment, if possible, that's been used?
So I think that's tying back to the smart heating controls specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen it, most of the bigger vendors we know have some form of controls. So we've seen it with United, Sunbelt, Cooper, Stevenson, and I'm sure there's more that I'm currently forgetting. So apologies to them.
Mm-hmm.
But we've seen different vendors have them available. I think what we've really noticed there is making sure that there's an understanding, specifically internally as well, there's a difference between sensors and controls. That's really the difference, and I think that's going into the use case there a bit. It's like a lot of our sites will have sensors on their equipment, but it's the controls aspect that's really that smart element that helps turn it on or off at a specific set point, and it helps kind of gather that data. So I'm hoping that provides enough detail there, but obviously happy to share some more technical detail as well if that's needed.
Yeah. Thank you, Denise. We'll go to the next question. And this one is kind of more specific, talking about virtual modeling and BIM. Are there any applications of models or BIM to reduce carbon emissions that you've used?
I could jump in. Sorry, I hope you can't hear my dog going crazy in the background. There's someone at the door. For us, we actually use BIM to do our logistics planning and to model for efficiencies and where we place things and how we can optimize our movements. So for us, we believe that if, focusing on that lean strategy can help us reduce our wastage of fuels and planning for smarter sites. And I think that's where we leverage BIM, if that helps.
Yeah.
And I can add to that as well. So we've piloted the use of BIM to be able to look at evaluating low carbon construction materials. So where we have projects where there's requirements to reduce embodied carbon, BIM allows us to model the use of like low carbon concrete or low carbon steel and actually look at measuring what the reduction in embodied carbon could be. So we are exploring the tool for that purpose. And there's many use cases when it comes to reduction of emissions, really from the planning and design perspective. But for us, it's really around piloting the use of it for embodied carbon.
I think for us, similar, we've been exploring it in terms of the materials kind of quantification and tracking there. I think the challenge that we've seen a little bit is that, like as with any model, I think it's your analysis or your data is only as falls and stands with the level of detail that's being put in the model and if it's being updated during. So that's something that we found a bit challenging, and it differs by a different kind of material types as well. Some tend to have more details or information in the models than others. So it's something we're looking at.
Yeah, if we're talking about embodied carbon materials, we use it to streamline our own LCA takeoffs as well. And there are things, to Denise's point, like rebar, you don't necessarily model it to that level of detail. So we also have to blend with shop drawings. But I think with technology and intelligent systems kind of moving forward and getting trained, I think there's a really awesome future there for optimization and analytics. And I think I was just recently at the BuildX Vancouver, and a lot of commonality in the themes were about design optimization and material efficiency and really understanding the systems you work with. And I think that's where BIM can really kick in and really help to understand what your constraints are and working with those constraints to optimize your impact.
And on the subject of LCA tools, the question, based on your studies, how the A5 in common whole building LCAs tools compare to the emissions you have tracked in your case study sites?
So I can flag like what we're seeing in our pilot project specifically. So for those ones, we're tracking both our own job site emissions as well as those from our sub trades, as well as kind of the emissions associated with transportation of materials to site. And we've compared those for select projects where there was also a LCA done, and we saw a difference. So that was like A4, A5, where in general the LCA would have said kind of like 7 to 9% maybe, and we were seeing 17 to 27% based on the real data. So I think, and this is on select projects, but that for us is really an indication that it's currently the A4 and A5 emissions are really, specifically A5 emissions are really underestimated in the tools. So that is something that as a group, we're also trying to spread the education around that in the LCA community and the wider community around like the real contribution of construction emissions there.
Yeah, I would agree. We're seeing a higher portion than what's being modeled, but I'd also like to challenge how we model and how we make assumptions, because regionality counts. And this is something that I feel really strongly about. When we set targets and we don't understand the potential opportunities for infrastructure, what we have to do to actually execute on the work and the logistics, we need to really account for that as to the site selection. And we should have some kind of regional data rather than like, is it an urban site? Is it a remote area site, rural site? I think these sorts of things and the percentage of allocations should vary. And I think that this is something that I'd like to challenge for the LCA community to kind of dive deeper and feed that information back to us. If you're doing projects that track, share it with us, because we'd like to see how we set that target as well.
All right, thank you. I think we only have 1 minute left for the webinar, so I just want to thank all the speakers. Thank you, Audrina, Denise, and Prab, for the great presentation. Thank you for everybody who joined us. I know we weren't able to get to all the questions today, but please feel free to reach out to us, whether it's individually here, and we can kind of connect you with a bigger group as well. Very happy to continue this conversation and continue our initiative as part of the Alliance. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining.
Thanks, and have a great day.